afternoon and welcome to today's session on diversity, equity, and inclusion in community and government. I'm Christina Trastic, the Director of Performance Management at the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families, and I'll be moderating today's session. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is important in any organization to be successful. For local government, DE&I is critical. Through research, we know that having a DE&I lens, active initiatives, and underlining values result in improved decision-making that better represents all communities, increased community trust in local governments and between citizens, and more equitable allocation of public resources to all communities, and as we know, improved employee satisfaction. So we're really lucky today to have two panelists who can speak directly to these findings by discussing their own experiences, including challenges they faced and successes that they've had. Our first panelist is Vice Mayor Erica A. Stewart, who was elected to the San Luis Obispo, or SLO, City Council in November 2018. She was the first African-American elected in the city's history. So for context, SLO is a small charter city with a population of 47,000 and located in the central coast of California. Professionally, she works at her alma mater as an assistant director of personnel and marketing for Cal Poly State University. Stewart earned her master's in public administration from the University of San Francisco. She brings over 20 years of experience in employee training, strategic planning, organizational development, and communications. She's certified as a professional in human resources and is a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion management and community building. She was previously the chief operating officer for the United Way and owned Wholesale Bakery, worked as a human resources manager in .com healthcare and manufacturing industries. And before the city council, she served as one of SLO's county personnel board commissioners. President of the local HR association, currently serving on the Cal Poly Alumni Association and Community Action Partnership boards. In 2020, she was named as one of the original founders of SLO's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Helping improve people's lives is her passion. Her volunteerism, philanthropy, career choices have been focused on education, diversity, and homelessness issues. She believes in creating sustainable programs and services that empower people to support their journey towards equity and self-sustainability. With that, welcome, Erica. Our second panelist, Barry L. Reeves, was appointed to the Boston's Planning and Development Agency's first ever Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in 2020. Barry brings over 12 years of experience in diversity and equity management, including employee relations, organizational design, training, development, and strategic communications. He serves as a member of the agency's senior leadership team and is charged with development and oversight of BPDA's racial equity and diversity priorities, and works to establish collaborative partnerships with internal and external stakeholders to foster a more inclusive, equitable, welcoming, and supportive, diverse agency. Prior to his role at BPDA, he served as an assistant director of investigations and training for the city of Boston and previously managed discrimination complaints program for the United States Naval Air Systems Command. He has served in various roles in the U.S. Army, including as an equal opportunity advisor. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army, serving active duty for 18 years, and a deep background in diverse leadership development, diversity and inclusion programming, analytics, and effectiveness. He's a certified diversity executive certified diversity coach, and a graduate of the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. Welcome, Barry. Wow. All I have to say is that's such great experience. I think there's a wealth of knowledge that we can learn from both of these individuals. And so I'm really excited to just jump in and start learning. So why don't we start our discussion with discussing diversity in relation to community engagement. So generally, we know stakeholder engagement is important, but if not done with care, it could do damage. In thinking about community engagement, how do you recommend government entities engage with populations who maybe don't trust government or historically have been disenfranchised? How do we shift our thinking from community engagement, not just as a checkbox, but as an active priority? Erica, let's start with you.
Thank you. Gotta love the mute button still to this day. I think, as you mentioned, it is so vital to have communities of color be part of the process. Whichever group you're working with as far as trying to engage community, if they don't have buy-in, you're not going to get anywhere. So really engaging your community in the sense of which groups are there that are most trusted. So for our community, for example, there's the promotores for the Latinx community. There are the NAACP and Race Matters happens to be kind of our diversity coalitions. We also have other community groups through their churches and their temples, et cetera. So really getting to know who are the groups that are going to be the most trusted that you can meet with, and you can start that engagement process, because collaboration is the key to really having any success with your program, having long-lasting outcomes. And when we look into building community, I look towards, I think it's San Francisco, there's Doreen Heckler, and there's Richard Harwood from the shootings in Columbine, really looking at how do you build community is having that connection. Of course, the old adage that, SMART, the strategic, measurable, accountable, et cetera, we really have to have the idea of what our outcome is going to be from everyone at the table. How is that going to be measured? What is that going to look like? How will this be long-standing and long-lasting? And if we're not in buy-in with what those measurables are, how we're going to gather that data, and if the communities that we're trying to reach don't have some way to be part of that data collection or part of that data input, then there's not going to be the trust that we need. So I think that's just kind of a little bit to start, and I'll let Barry continue.
No, that's Erica's spot on with that. I think the thing I would add to that is that we need to create the structure and the systems that allows for participatory government in government. And so a lot of times our structure isn't suited to allow them to participate and have their feedback heard at the decision-making table. And so we need to ensure when we talk about community engagement, it's really community participation in our organizational designs, in our structure, in our decision-making process, to ensure that voices are heard at every level of the process, whatever it is. Second thing is that when we look at community engagement, it's not just about getting their feedback, it's actually trying to engage them to participate with them on the health and safety and outcomes of their neighborhoods. Most of these community members have lived in these neighborhoods 10, 12, 20, 25 years. And so they have a deep understanding and passion about seeing the health of their neighborhoods continue on actively. And so we need to engage them as servants to their support, and not coming in and telling them what we think their neighborhood should be like. We also have to make sure that we demystify our process. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of times that there's a mystery about how government works. And so we need to do things like civic engagement programs to really educate the public on what the agency or the government does and how it actually works in the process, whether it's the budget, whether it's planning and development, whether it's city design, whether it's our city process or police department. We need to ensure that they understand how we get to these decisions and the data that supports these decisions, and ensure that they understand why this is, and then make sure that they're at the table to help make that decision as a part of a whole inclusive city, not just a city that is there catering to a perception of catering to one aspect or another, but it's all of us sitting at the table making decisions on the health and outcome of our city.
That's great. I really hearing you guys say making sure that folks are at the table, have a big table somewhere where they feel comfortable, and really building that trust through, I liked what you said, Barry, about demystifying processes. And Erica, I really like your reference about the SMART, the measurable. I've seen other municipalities and organizations add an IE, Smarty. It's cute, but it's also the equity and inclusion piece, and so that we're not taking an eye off of that. So that's fabulous, great. So why don't we, Barry, we're going to start this next question off with you. So often when we do equity initiatives, the first, and unfortunately sometimes the only thing we do, I've seen in unfortunate instances where we just take documents and translate them into other languages, and we say, okay, yep, we're accounting for culture and language because we translated these documents. And in that example of translating documents, even then, not always does the translation make sense. One personal experience that I had was we had a lead remediation initiative, and it was called Get the Lead Out. Well, once we had those documents translated, we were able to translate it just fine, but it didn't make logical sense to others outside of the English language or even our culture, and that the references just didn't land at the message we were trying to translate. So although that's a basic example, could you talk about some challenges or successes you've had when it comes to culture and language and access, and what we should be doing to ensure that cultural access?
Well, it goes back to making sure that language access is a strategic imperative for your organization. It supports everything that you do. There's been studies where a lot of different cities are more diverse, more having a bigger immigrant population, and so we need to understand not only from a language access point, but a cultural aspect point to ensure that when we think about community engagement, goes back to the first initial question. How do we leverage language and cultural understanding to ensure that we're reaching the masses when it comes to these particular communities that we serve? Like you said, that was a great point that you made, where sometimes translation is technically right, but it's not actually appropriate when it comes to the actual language that we're translating or the culture that we're trying to reach. And so we need to engage, and this is where that healthy relationship comes in when we talk about any document or any city services that you're trying to offer, making sure that when you get down to that particular individual, does this make sense? Do you have connections to help you with that translation, not just going through the technical process of having it translated, but actually saying, does this make appropriate sense in the translated language? But it also starts with actually having a healthy relationship already from the get-go. So meaning we're not translating documents just to say, here, we've translated. It's meaning that we've gotten community dialogue and engagement, and we talk about what is important to be translated, how our services, how we translate our services, how do we reach and understand the differences in the culture and the heritage that play a major part in a lot of these individuals' lives, and how do we understand that and leverage that to better support them in their health and growth for the community. And so we need to do more. And I think the successes we've had is that we begin to understand, and we look at our population map, and we begin to understand what languages are there, and we are trying to develop healthy relationships to help us better translate and better make sure that the services are appropriate to that particular community that we're trying to support.
Awesome, thank you. Erica, do you have any insights into this area?
Absolutely. And I love what, Barry, you said around really having that relationship first and that trust first. That's the most important. And if you have that trust, you're able to say what works in your community, what has not worked in your community for that matter too, and really getting that feedback. Similar to your lead example, Christina, I think we've all had that kind of situation where we say, okay, I remember that moment and it didn't work well. How could we have done this differently? Hopefully you've had this debrief before. However, that doesn't always happen. And I really think about, we change some of our programs so that we have the ability for people to respond at off hours, whatever, if they have multiple jobs, or they have family at home, whatever it may be, where they can't come to us from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, but they still really care about something we're changing in their community, a program, zoning changes. We recently made a zoning update so childcare is available, or is an opportunity in all of the different zones in our community. That wasn't possible in the city before. So really getting that feedback of what's important to each community and how they want to communicate. So we also added not just, of course, email, but the open town hall. And open town hall is an opportunity to actually give feedback at that moment and be calculated when the staff calculates the feedback and the information back from the community that comes to the council. So when we make these policy updates, they've been included, whether they were actually able to be at the table in person or online or via phone, etc.
Great. So I think we'll probably hear this throughout our discussion, but that engagement up front is really key. And then something I had thought of is hearing both of you talk about just not assuming how people want to be communicated with, or thinking that you know which languages or which cultures are in your community that you're having an active pulse. That's really important to be strategic in having that access. So that's great. That's great. Okay, so I've started seeing more and more discussion in literature around equitable frameworks. So for those of you, for those of us who are new to the concept of equitable frameworks, could you guys discuss, and Erica, we'll start with you, how you define city equitable frameworks and what this looks like in your city and in your work?
Absolutely. I think with us, we really look at all aspects of our community. We don't, there's the DEI task force that we recently put together so that we could have more engagement, not just within our city, but also within our county, because we realized that even if people worked in the city of SLO, they didn't necessarily live here because they didn't necessarily feel comfortable, or because of affordable housing not being as available. So really back to that, creating the opportunity to engage different communities, to collaborate and design and implement a plan for all of our aspects. So whether it's inclusionary housing, obviously mentioned already our zoning update, but the inclusionary housing, we very specifically did not want to create pockets of poverty or pockets of people of different ethnicities or religions, all the isms. We wanted people to be part of the community as a whole. We want to be a welcoming and belonging community, and that can't happen when there's pockets of people separated. We see that throughout our county, that is something that happens. And so partially, we realized in having these conversations, it's because there's services or there's products that people need that are not available. And that's where we started realizing, okay, that's what we need to make change. That's how we need to make change in our city, which is how do we get those products available? How do we get those services available to bring people of different backgrounds to feel comfortable living here and to be part of the community actively. Also, back to the measurable aspect of these frameworks. So whether it is our transportation and helping us become a 15-minute city, we want to be able to help people move throughout our city, whether it's through walking, riding bikes, riding their cars, riding public transportation, and getting from point A to point B in 15 minutes. That's our goal, and that's because that's what people have told us is necessary for people to live here and work here successfully. Also, when we come to our finances and how we invest, we look at not just the product of the fund, whether it's environmental or diverse or sustainable, but also what's the governance look like of those corporations, of those businesses we're investing in? Do they have diverse boards? Do they have diverse leadership? That's important to us as we continue. So really sharing with our community that this is what we're looking for, I think is also a help to know that we're not there yet, and we understand that. And we also are creating this space and this plan to get there eventually. And then when you look at back to outcomes and measurable, what are those deadlines? What are those timelines that different community members are saying, we need this first, we need this prioritized, and you're not listening to us, or we need this prioritized, and thank you for listening to us, depending on the situation. So really that's how we look at what we're doing as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Barry, could you talk a little bit from your perspective about equitable frameworks?
Well, like Erica said that, you know, without that equity framework, you really don't have the guidelines that focus your policies through. And so when we talk about an equitable framework, we're talking about what are the guiding principles that you and your organization will undertake to ensure that your outcomes are creating the type of things that you want to happen. So you can talk about wanting to see the budget support more, or you want to see more opportunities. But if your framework does not support that, it does not force the structure to change. It does not force your decision making to change. It does not force the organization itself to understand how to bring those things to pass. And so when you're adopting an equity framework, what you're really thinking about is that how do we incorporate and ensure that all of our processes are filtered through a particular lens to ensure that that outcome happens on a consistent and regular basis, and to ensure that we have the ability to measure, understand, and transform those things that are impacted, and remove the barriers that create those that did not allow us to make those outcomes happen. And so it forces the organization to also learn and grow and transform itself every time we go through this process, and that we're ensuring that we're taking the equitable feedback from the people that it's tending to serve, and taking that feedback in and re-looking at the process and reimagining every time we do this. Because it's easy to say we're creating a bunch of equitable outcomes, but when we look at the outcomes, and that's really the most key thing, what are the actual outcomes? What do we see actually happen in the lives of the people that we serve? And if we're still seeing the outcomes not being actually appropriate, or not really having the level of impact we have, then we have to go back and look at the internal structure to see why that isn't happening. Is it an issue of training? Is it an issue of mismanagement, or no priorities, or no clear understanding of how to actually get there, and not just throwing out a bunch of statements that mean absolutely nothing when it comes to the actual organizational process itself?
Yeah, I think you guys both make excellent points about the measurement aspect, because you can have this framework in place, but until you're measuring those outcomes and being able to pivot, as you just mentioned, Barry, in understanding maybe why you're not meeting those outcomes, you really need to have that information. And I think that's a good segue into my next question, discussion point around having information. So we know that data can drive and inform change. Data can also pose challenges in regards to collection as well as interpretation. So again, starting with you, Barry, could you just discuss data challenges or success that you faced in your DE&I work?
Well, I will say that a lot of times we get caught up, and you have to really interpret data from the filter of what you're trying to actually measure. And what I mean by that is that you need to understand what you're trying to actually see happen. Are you looking for are you trying to what measure are you trying to make when it comes to your outcome? So when we look at data, number one, we have to understand what we're measuring. So are we trying to look for more diversity? Are we trying to understand how this budget is impacting certain criteria? Are we looking for how we see if our initiatives are actually making the kind of change we want? And so you have to understand what you're actually measuring. And then you have to take some realistic approaches about how you collect data, because some data can tell you a lot of different things. It can tell you straightforward numbers. It can tell you whether you're making incremental procedures, but sometimes you can interpret that data and not really get the understanding of why that data is telling you what and whatever. So you got to make sure that the data tells you the right story and gives you an accurate picture of what you're trying to measure. I would tell any DEI professional and any government is, don't just come up with a bunch of measurements that don't really tell you anything. Make sure that you've gotten real thought about what it is you're trying to measure, especially in the DEI space. Meaning you can't just say, hey, look, we have a diverse organization and really it's only 2%. What does that really mean? Or in the MBE space where we're saying that, hey, we've done 14% of spend for our overall budget, but really we've only spent that money with only 3 organizations or 3 agencies. So you really haven't, so the numbers may tell you that you're doing successful, but it doesn't, but But once again, it goes back to what the outcomes are and how do you measure success on the ground, as opposed to what maybe some arbitrary numbers will tell you. And so our success has always been to understand how we best measure it and making sure that our dashboards and our tools that help us analyze the issues are actually reasonable and help us understand how to continue to move the process forward in every outcome that we're trying to make.
Great, thank you. Erica, insights from your perspective.
Thank you. I think partially data can be read in any way possible. Really, with the same data can share with you anything. However, back to the trust, I think when we talk about how we're going to measure our actions and implement our program back to the communities that we talked to originally, how do they see success in the future is going to be vital as to saying, okay, and then let's turn around and say, how can we get that data? Some of that is something we would collect, whether it's rent costs or how many people are getting fed at the homeless shelter, for example. However, a lot of these things are not actually accurate if someone who's undocumented doesn't feel comfortable letting people know. They're not going to then check off the survey. Or if someone who is unhoused is fearful because we are bringing police along around the counting of how many homeless are in the community, then again, they're going to hide, not feel comfortable, not be part. So really, we have to look at how are we asking the question, who are we involved in gathering that data? And then when we look at that data, how are we actually analyzing it? Are we realizing that there's a percentage of individuals that are not actually commenting that they are XYZ background? They might say, oh yes, mixed, or they might say, and what does that really mean? And where does that come? How do you plug that into the data? We've seen that even actually at the university I work at, is now the numbers are even more skewed when people don't actually let you know each and every aspect they are identifying as. Also, there's the quantitative and the qualitative as far as data. Of course, we have all of our numbers, and the data analyst gives us, what percentage we're spending, for example, like Barry was mentioning. However, there's a qualitative aspect. I'm sorry, there's a qualitative aspect to that, which if people can share with you why they're not answering questions, why they are answering questions, who is missing at the table, who is missing in the data collection, what times of day is better than others to gather the information, all of that is not a full story if we're just looking at the numbers alone. So really looking at back to when we first started the process with the framework, what does success look like when we implement the program, and how do we get there? How do we measure? And if we are realizing that the data we're collecting is not providing what we need, we have to be able to pivot and ask the questions, what are we missing? What do we need? How do we make the change? And really that happened with us when we were trying to provide grants for diversity, equity, inclusion, trying to be helpful about a year ago, and then realizing that no one really knew what that meant. How was the nonprofit providing information? How were they being assessed? So we had to actually go out and have another conversation with the nonprofits. And then that's when it really came to head that we needed this actual task force to start talking to people and understanding what this means. Then we were able to give out $150,000, and they wish there was $600,000 just from the grants alone. So really that's where that change happened pretty quickly.
Christina, could I add one additional thing to that too as well? To Erica's point, I think the other thing that we have to think about too is that we have to measure success over a couple of different periods. So whether it's a short-term period, whether it's a intermediate period or a long-term, I believe you have to do a lot of that in all the different spaces to ensure that you can see what the short-term issue is, so you can make adjustments into the program and the initiative, but then you can also make that mid-year and maybe even 2-year point, but then measure the effects of over 5 years to see what it is that you've been able to accomplish. And I believe that a lot of agencies do not think about that in the planning of the initiative. I think they are looking more like just what the initiative can do and not the measurement of success of the initiative itself, which has to be the central point of why you're doing the initiative. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And when we accomplish it, what should be the outcome and measure of those successes? And how much money did we commit to that and not thinking about that? And so I'm always cautious on pushing out initiatives that we can't tie how we measure to, because what it does is that it just creates a space where we use a lot of money and a lot of resources and time and talent to do something, and then it goes left, and then we can't account for that. And one of the things that we have to do to make the citizens trust us is that we have to be thoughtful in what we do and when our approaches when it comes to community engagement and initiatives to improve overall quality of life. And so we want to make sure that we are a measurements based organization, not just an organization that does a bunch of projects.
That's an excellent point, Barry. I think really what I'm hearing you guys say is measure what matters. Right? I think with anything, you need to measure what matters. Otherwise, you're just going to have a story without data. I'm also hearing that data is just part of the story. You need to have a full picture. And I think that's where it relates to what are the outcomes that you want to achieve. Make sure that your partners understand that outcome. And then really, again, the thread throughout all of this is having the trust and connection and collaboration with the communities to be able to ensure you're doing the right things, you're measuring the right outcomes. So with that, in that same vein, there's a question from the audience. And if you guys can think about some really specific examples, I think potentially a few were given, but how do you get members to engage, members of your community to engage when there's a lot of mistrust? If you think about mistrust over years, and how do you turn that conversation, which sometimes can feel heavy and criticism, whether on either end, right? Sometimes that ends up coming in a place of negative. How do you turn that into constructive conversations?
Well, I would share the first thought is that you can't be afraid to hear the tough stuff. You can't be afraid to hear the criticism, and you can't just show up just to hear without thinking about what it is that you're going to do on the other side of that conversation. A part of our process, a part of our responsibilities in these positions is also to heal our community from some of the historical incidents that have happened within our particular communities, especially communities of color. And so we have to be thoughtful in approaching the community and be prepared to make the kind of transformation that's necessary to heal that process. And sometimes it's just simply listening to the community itself, and then taking that feedback back and then incorporating it back into our process. I will share with you that one of the greatest things that any organization, any city government can do is not just listen, but create the space to hear that on a consistent basis and not be afraid of that kind of conversation, because it's probably one of the most important things that you will do as a government agency is to hear your constituency and then take appropriate feedback on and appropriate action on the things that they recommend. And then do a great job in informing and making sure that you educate them on the government and making sure that they understand how your processes and how you arrive to decisions and how each agency and department works, and get your agency out of its office to go talk to the community about its particular things that they do, so that way they can better understand. Because if you don't fill that space with good information, it will be filled by somewhere else. Somewhere, somehow, that information is going to get out there, and then you're going to end up battling the perceptions of your agency, not the actual reality of what your agency does. And so don't be afraid to actually get out there and inform and educate and create a healthy, robust civic engagement strategy that allows you to educate the public on what you do as an organization itself.
Great, thank you, Barry. Erica?
100% agree. The communication is so key. The space to be able to hear people where they need to be, where we need to go to them. One of the things that we heard through the task force was we invited different communities of color to come to us and say what's working, what's not working, back to earlier what I mentioned. And one of the things was, it was so clear that the Latinx community got the majority of their information either from trusted individuals or from the radio. And we really weren't putting a lot out on the radio when it was relevant, for people to learn more about the government, learn more about our programs. And so seeing that we needed to make that change was really important. Also, as we talk about how do we hear back from people and what do we make as the change? So we had our chief of police recently left, and there's really big tension right now around communities, Black and Brown communities with our police. And so when she first started here, she created a police pact, police and communities together organization, and really brought people, invited everyone that wanted to come to the table and said, how can we make the changes that you are feeling, that you're concerned with? Some of it was communication, just educating them that what they thought was the case was not. Some of it was, wow, we needed to hear that so we can make certain changes. As we get ready to bring on a new police chief, during the selection process, we made it very clear that this was one of the most vital aspects of our community was the pact. And yes, make it your own, make it 2.0 version, but individuals in our community need to come together and be part of the policing changes that we're going to be having in the future. And so that process is, getting started again. And it's that filling the gap when people don't hear from you was already starting. They didn't know what was happening. They assumed that people were getting kicked off of the committee. They weren't invited anymore. And the reality is that's not true. And so having that conversation with this organization, the Police and Communities Together, was really true, finding out to be very helpful. So that's just one example of how do we continue to keep people at the table on really important conversations.
Great. Thank you, Erica, for that. So there's another question from the audience. This is for Barry. So we'll start with Barry, but then also give Erica a chance to respond from her perspective. The question is, does the City of Boston include DE&I into the strategic planning process to ensure not only the operational side, but community engagement is taken into account for the future of the city over time?
That would be an absolute yes. This is why our former mayor actually integrated and created a position of chief equity officer at the cabinet level, because that individual in that role allows for integration of the strategic imperatives of DEI into the overall organizational process. And that allows for the city to think about DEI not only from a strategic standpoint, but then filters to all the way down from the operational level through the tactical level of the organization itself, and ensuring that it's creating those type of outcomes in and it helps inform the city priorities when it comes to all aspects of the organization itself. So yes, the city does do that. And I think the chief equity officer of the city does that, but that also speaks to every organization, ensuring that that chief equity person, whether it's the director of equity or inclusion or the DEI chief, has the power and ability to integrate the organization DEI into the organizational process, meaning that it's not just going out and talking about micro inequalities and other things. It's actually talking about our budget process and our community engagement process and our ISDs and our other organizational processes on a daily basis to ensure that we're thinking about DEI in everything that we do when it comes to our constituency.
Fantastic. Erica, same to you. I don't know if you guys do formal strategic planning, but really, again, the question about operational side, but also community engagement to think about the future of the city.
Thank you. That's a great question. We really are newer to this process. This year was the first year that we said, okay, we need to actually have an Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. We need to have an actual chief officer as one of the department heads, the leadership with the city manager, not just some token coordinator position. And then this task force that came into play in this last year to actually enact the recommendations, which is a strategic plan going forward for our city. In the midst of this interim period, every 2 years we do major city goal setting for our budget, and therefore also for our work plans and the operations of our city. And this year we said, through absolutely everything, DEI and climate change needs to be the lens that we're looking for. We had a member of our council that said, well, I don't understand how this can be part of everything. We said, as simple as you're looking at putting in paving a road and changing something with all of our new transportation plans. How does this affect people of color? How does this affect people of different financial backgrounds? Where are you putting that bus stop now? Is that bus stop making it more difficult for people that might be coming from a little bit more of a neighborhood of more apartments and potentially less income? Does that make it more difficult for them to get to their childcare, their work, et cetera? Really thinking about a simple question that then begins to branch out into all these other issues. Also looking at our entire budget, like I said, it can't just be about this little pocket of DEI money over here in the budget. It needs to be in everything we're doing, in all the funds of our budget, where we can make change and where we can affect everybody.
Great. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to talk with you guys, and I want to encourage the audience to please continue. We have some time to submit some questions, but I do just want to take a step back and just reflect on the amazing messages that you guys have already put out. But I really appreciate just this last exchange about the integration. It can't just be something separate. It really needs to be at every level. It can't be a token position. It has to be really elevated to that the place that where it well deserves, at the top of the leadership teams within your each of our cities and municipalities. Knowing we have some time left, I do want to give both you, Barry, and Erica, some time if there's topics we haven't touched upon, or just closing remarks. And then, of course, if the audience has additional questions, we do have a few minutes. So I'll open it up.
I would just throw out there that that is so strategically imperative to think about DEI from an operational standpoint, not just a response to social justice or anything else, because what DEI is supposed to help you do is to help you think through how you approach a particular problem or an issue, and the right framework and lens to help you ensure those equitable outcomes, and that you're creating a diverse organization, and that you're bringing inclusiveness to everything that you do. And so it starts with also training your staff to think this way. And I think you've got to, because you cannot lay everything at the feet of the chief diversity officer or everything else. This is DEI is leadership. It's leadership in its capacity in every aspect and every level. And so while you may empower a chief diversity officer to come in and help you set your priorities and help you do your framework, it is still leadership one-on-one. So that means you have to have culturally competent leaders. You've got to have leaders that understand the problem and have a strategic and operational focus about everything that they do and how they approach the constituencies that they serve. But you also got to make sure that you're building leaders within to think about your issues and your problems and your solutions to the problems, because you want to make just as much of an investment in DEI as you are in leadership. So DEI is a part of building competencies to help you look at and serve your constituency in a fuller and more healthier way. And you can't do that by just saying, well, the chief diversity officer is going to be responsible for that. It's everyone at every leadership level, at every position, at every level, from the strategic all the way down to the tactical. I need to ensure that my parking attendant out on the street has as much competency about DEI as the cabinet officer. And so it's important that we integrate leadership and DEI into everything that we do, in every aspect of leadership when it comes to our organization as well.
Great. Erica, open the floor up to you.
There's a couple of things I keep thinking about, and one is definitely the training and people at every single department you can think of. Whoever someone interacts with, it doesn't matter if they're the highest position or an entry-level position. It's the person they're interacting with, and that's who they assume the city is and everything they believe and do. So I think that really understanding that customer service, it's not just customer service and how to care for your public. It's how to care for everyone in your public, and therefore you need to understand what that looks like in the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion and training. Also, we really have to look at our partners, our other governmental agencies, businesses that we partner with, nonprofits that we partner with, those who we don't and we need to bring into the fold, for example. Also, the philanthropists in your community and the residents who aren't also on board as much with DEI, and how do we help make them understand this is important to them too. And you're not having something taken away from you. We're actually broadening what we can provide in this community, and therefore have a more inclusive experience is better for everyone involved. The other part of this is it sounds so simple and trite, but language. You know, we've got to the point that we're looking at how do we take out different language. You know, something that's very common is shoot me an email. Really, as we talk about, as just as much as we talk about language of, oh, this, you know, you don't want to say this word because this is what a different community doesn't appreciate. That's important. And then we also have to think about, why are we using things like master plan? Why do we use things like the, you know, the master tree and the master directory? You know, we have to look at, these are small things just to take out a word. But for us, for example, since we're a charter city, to take out the she, her pronouns, to change certain things requires a vote of the public. So to get the vote of the public to understand why they would need to change the pronouns in our charter, that's a huge educational process that is not just a little bit of training here or there. And I will say, my son, he's 17, and his best friend, he's a lifeguard for the city pool. And he said, Mom, the other day, my friend had to spend 2 hours on diversity training. What is that about? He's just a pool person. And really realizing that this is what we're talking about. Everyone at every level and every department needs to understand what we're trying to do in making change going forward.
Thank you both again. This has been a really amazing discussion. I've personally learned a lot, and I think so has our audience. And it's clear that you guys both are very passionate about what you do. And so I really hope that other folks reach out to you and ask questions. I think maybe actually, as I'm about to wrap up, there is one last question. All right, so what is the simplest changes? So this is what we'll end on, okay? What are the simplest changes with which you have seen have the biggest impact?
Oh gosh, I will say to you is that the willingness to have communication conversations, the willingness to show that you're open to hear and receptive to changes. It'd be as simple as sitting down and having a cup of coffee, or creating a dialogue, or creating maybe a safe space to have these tough but necessary conversations. Generally yield the biggest changes in a government agency. Once again, I think there's a lot of people who feel like their government doesn't serve them. And that could be a lot of different perceptions, or especially in certain communities. But I think the willingness to actually come from behind your desk and sit down with this person and listen, and not necessarily try to drive the conversations, but actually just be in a mood to listen to what they have to say, creates the biggest impacts, because it starts the conversation and the dialogue. And I will say this: appropriate feedback. Meaning, if there are question asked, it doesn't take 3 years to respond. It takes, train your staff to get responses back in 72 hours. And if they can't get it back in 72 hours, respond in kind, saying, listen, this is going to take us a little longer to provide some information back to you, but we're going to give you back. And don't just do an email. Take the time to actually sit down and talk to that person, and watch what happens when in the experience they have with that conversation, and what happens when they go out back to their neighborhoods and talk about that interaction, and how helpful it was, and how it created this space and opportunity for trust to be built. And so I think, Erica had mentioned customer service. It's just going beyond customer service. It's not just having to, it's I want to. And we want to serve our community, not I have to serve my community. We want to serve our community. Serving our community is a position of trust. And every staff member has to understand that and operate from that space, that we get to serve our community, not that we have to.
That's great, Barry. I very much agree. And I think expanding on that just a teeny bit, in the sense of, what are the ways that people want to be communicated with? Some want to be quiet and they don't want to really interact too much. Some want to have a full-on conversation, whether it's in person, via Zoom. COVID has given us new opportunities of different ways to communicate. And Zoom has been fantastic in the realm that we could connect with people in so much faster of a way of I can meet with you on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday morning because I am available via Zoom. I don't have to get in my car, drive to you, get a whole outfit ready, et cetera. And I know that sounds quite small, but it is really useful to have those conversations. And then to have that feedback come back, similar to what Barry was saying as far as the email, but also to be able to share what feedback you have, what that feedback did and how it connected. Here's what we've changed now in our city, for example. Here's what we've changed now in that process you suggested. And we've gotten to the point in our city that we're actually hiring a communications manager to purely focus on providing more communication to the public, because we're in a space now in 2021 where social media, website, podcasts, radio, in-person meetings when COVID gets done, all of these things are moving at such a fast pace, and there are so many ways people are getting their information that the few ways that we used to give out information, it's not enough. So we really have to make sure that we're consistently letting people know where we're at, how we took that feedback, how we took that money we talked about in the sales tax revenue, and we're making the change that you asked for. We're making the change in transportation. We're making the change in diversity hiring processes. We're looking into that multicultural center still, but it's going to be a lot larger, and we need to get involved with developers and philanthropists, maybe, really sharing who are the other parties who were not at the table in the initial discussion, and we need to continue to collaborate and partner with different individuals or different groups. That's been very helpful, so that people felt more connected, growing the trust, and being able to see that we're heading down that road. If we have to push out a deadline, we need to tell them why, and that we're not just abandoning the project or the plan.
It's awesome. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Start the conversation, meet people where they're at, make sure that you're responsive. Feedback loop, super important in right, the old right, always saying you can never over communicate. So I think these are just awesome points to end on. Again, I want to thank both of you and encourage the audience to reach out to both Erica or Barry if you have additional questions. So thanks, everybody.